Thank you so much, Dr. Linda. And we're very grateful for your point of view. So we've talked about, we all have an idea of what we're talking about now and its importance. We do know that there's been mistrust and distrust in the past, but it is important that we move forward. So yes, there's good, bad, and ugly, but how do we move forward to a brighter future? And also, how can we make sure that, those of us who are migrating here are enjoying the benefits? And also, what are some of the things that policymakers in the continent can do to ensure that we have participation on the continent as well? And so that's why I was very delighted when Dr. Kingsley agreed to be a part of this forum, because he's got one leg in North America and the other leg on the African continent. Matter of fact, he works closely with the Honorable Chairwoman of the Foundation, First Lady Betty Akeredolu, and they're currently working together to make sure that the Cancer Center in Ondo State is up and running. So he comes with a very vibrant perspective and concrete steps on what we can do to ensure that we're going in the right direction. Also, please feel free to ask questions. Put your questions in the Q&A, because when Dr. Kingsley is done, we're going to open the floor for questions and answers. Dr. Kingsley, over to you, sir.
Thank you so much for the invitation and the organization. And, I just want to thank my other panelists, Cynthia and Linda, for, such excellent presentation and sort of laying the foundation on which I would run on. And they've sort of made the work easier. So thank you. So I think, we've talked about mistrust, and I think I would need to touch on that a little bit, give a little bit of historical perspectives, because I think when you understand where the problem is coming from, then it's a little bit easier to sort of address it. And, I think Cynthia has touched on the famous one, which is the Tuskegee trials. It's very hard for me that name, but yeah. So, in summary, just to piggyback on what she said, they wanted to see, at the time there was some treatments for syphilis, and so they wanted to see, the U.S. government wanted to see, what the natural course of the disease was. And I think there are two fundamental things that happened there. They recruited poor Black people, and these are poor Black people that didn't have access to healthcare. There were about 600 of them, and they lied to them that they were actually giving them some sort of health checkups. And they didn't know because, of course, if you don't have access to health and someone says they're coming for free health, you go, and basically they gave them syphilis. They basically gave them syphilis to watch them over time and see how the disease plays out. And that was so unfortunate. It went on for 40 years, but it didn't stop there. I mean, it's raised when it was leaked to the press. That was when the whole rearrangement of how clinical trials should be done happened. And I would agree with Cynthia that, a fundamental change really happened, not just in the US, but I think around the world. But prior to that, there was another case. Some of you might have heard of Henrietta Lacks from Baltimore, Maryland, where she was a young woman that had cervical cancer at a very young age, as is seen in a lot of African populations. Cancer is diagnosed much earlier for a lot of cancers. And her cells were used, the immortal lines of her cells were used for several types of research without the consent of the family. And it has led to some products that have been commercialized, companies that have spun up, that are now billion-dollar companies. And the family of Henrietta Lacks never knew about this. And yeah, so it's actually led to the establishment of what is now known today as informed consent. So these two two incidences, the Henrietta Lacks story and the Tuskegee trials, led to really the establishment of the informed consent and the IRB boards, which is now standard, the institutional review boards or ethical review boards, as you may choose to call it, which is now standard for reviewing and approving a trial to happen or clinical research that involves human subjects, and also monitoring that trial or research. But it didn't stop there. Even with all these changes that have happened, with all these regulations that have happened, there have been more that have happened. And I'll just cast your minds to 1996, which is not too far away. 1996 is just, a little over 20 years or thereabout ago. So in 1996, Pfizer, it's public, so I can mention their names. I think Pfizer is a great company, but when they do bad, we should also call out their bad. So Pfizer was going to trial a drug called Trovan, and it was a new antibiotic. They wanted to test it for meningitis, and they went to Nigeria. They went to Kano. And they essentially set up a clinical trial without any IRB approval to test the efficacy of Trovan on, meningitis on kids. And their parents did not know what was being given to their kids, so there was no informed consent in this trial, and it led to a number of deaths. And the other thing that was alleged, I'll say it's an allegation right now, but the other thing that was alleged that, Pfizer did was that on the control group, they had given a much lesser dose of I can't remember, is a cephalosporin that they gave, but they gave, I think, 33 milligram per kg, but the recommended dose was 50 to 100. Because the thinking was that if they had given a lower dose, it would make the experimental drug look more efficacious. And so these were big injustices on many levels. They were, they were taken to court here in the US, and they decided to settle out of court and paid the families $75 million. But it didn't stop there. In 2010, in 2009, 2010, when the CIA was in hot pursuit of Osama bin Laden, they got intelligence that he was in a certain compound I can't remember the name of the place right now, in Pakistan. And so they set up a fake vaccination campaign. Okay, so they were given, and it's a fact. These are not we're not here to tout conspiracy theories. These are facts. You can Google them, you can read about them. And so the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, or the spy agency of the United States, set up a fake vaccination campaign in Pakistan, around the area where they got intelligence that Osama bin Laden was. And essentially this vaccination campaign, I think the vaccination was for hepatitis B. And so this vaccination campaign was basically to take samples for DNA profiling, to see if there are some Osama bin Laden relatives that were around, to kind of test their intelligence to be sure that Osama bin Laden was in that compound. And unfortunately, it leaked. Fortunately, unfortunate for the CIA, of course, but fortunate for, the scientific world, that, oh, wow. So the CIA actually set up fake vaccination campaigns. They came in as health workers, blah, blah, blah. So it's good to understand sort of this historic perspective. And I've just given a few. There are a lot more, but I've just given a few. And so you can imagine that, there's a huge distrust of vaccinations in Pakistan, because they know, it's a fact that, they have had that kind of issue. It was also very tough, and you can see that the last frontier for the fight for the eradication of polio was in northern Nigeria, because that was big news in northern Nigeria, that a bunch of people came and killed our kids. That was the narrative. And so these are the seeds of distrust that have been sown. Having said this, it doesn't ignore all the checkpoints that have been put up in clinical research, clinical trials. Like other panelists have said, there's so many eyes watching, and in very rare instances, there are rogue actors sometimes that should be looked out for. And so these distrusts definitely have a foundation. They have a background to them. And so I think that should inform the strategy. And I think some of the panelists, I think both of you, Cynthia and Linda, you've kind of mentioned how we can really break that distrust. And I think it's one of the ways is really community engagement, engaging the community, even during the planning of the trials, bringing people that look like them, that they trust in the communities, in the churches, in the nonprofit organizations, where people trust the people that lead those organizations, and start engaging those people right from the very planning stage of that trial. These are ways I think you can start building trust, because it takes a lot for people to trust any clinical study, be that as it may. And it's rooted on mishaps and injustices that have happened in the past. So it's very important for even every trial to have a budget for community engagement, engaging that community from the planning phase to the start to the end of the trial is very important. I think clinical studies that have had that inbuilt in them have shown that they have gotten quite a lot of participation when they engage with the community. For cancer specifically, Black people are the most genetically diverse humans on Earth, right? And cancer is a genetic disease, right? And there are some drugs that are basically genetic targets, protein targets. And if we don't have enough diversity in these trials, we might miss what the real efficacy is for Blacks, and we might even miss safety data, because sometimes there might be some, maybe rare side effects that are seen more in Blacks that may not have been picked out in the clinical trial because there was less Black participation. So the importance of diversity in clinical trials is cannot be overemphasized, and I think community engagement is very key. A very important data to note for everyone listening is, in the past 12 years or thereabouts, all the drugs that have been approved by FDA, by the FDA for cancer, only 3% or less than 3% of the trials that led to those approvals had Blacks in participation. So at the end of the day, you don't even know really what the real, these drugs are efficacious, but you don't know what the real numbers are. The other thing that is also very important, besides clinical trials, is just epidemiologic studies. It's very important to know what the picture looks like from a racial lens. A very good example is colorectal cancer. Here in the US, the median age for diagnosis for colorectal cancer is 68 years. And it makes sense to tell people to start screening, or for the guidelines to say screen at 50, do a colonoscopy at 50, although that has been revised to 45, right? But when you look at the data from, when you do what they call, regression analysis based on race, Black people get colorectal cancer much, much earlier than what the national average is in the US. A recent study a few years back, a study that was done in University of Ife, or Obafemi Awolowo University in Nigeria, in collaboration with Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York, showed that the median age of diagnosis for colorectal cancer in Nigeria, or southwestern Nigeria, is 43 years old, right? So when you think about the fact that a lot of African Americans came from West Africa, migrated from West Africa, were shipped from West Africa, some from East Africa, they share that ancestral genetics, right? Since colorectal cancer is largely a genetic, disease, it makes sense that we're seeing colorectal cancer happen at much earlier ages for Blacks. So the question is, should everyone go through those guidelines as a screening guideline because that's the national average, or should we be more precise for it? Now, this is a question that is also very important for insurance companies because insurance companies will work with what the guidelines say. So for example, if you think you want to go screen at 35, the Black person, insurance is not going to pay for it because that's not what the guideline says. So some of these things need to be changed to be more precise. A very good example is Chadwick Boseman, the Wakanda, star. He unfortunately passed on from colorectal cancer at 44. He was diagnosed at 39. He wasn't alive to screen when it was recommended to screen. So that's why epidemiologic studies are so important, knowing what the prevalence, the incidence of certain diseases among racial groups, among people of different socioeconomic status, those sort of things are very important than looking at it as a blanket case. One way we could win this fight, if we want to call it a fight, because when you look at health from an equity lens, it's a fight. You're fighting to close disparities. You're fighting to close inequities. One way is to look at the source. So we want to know how this disease happens in Blacks. Where do you find the most Black population? Africa. Okay. Because no matter what you do, the Black population in the US, correct me if I'm wrong, I think is 11%, or somewhere between 11 and 13.
Yeah, about 12%. Yeah.
So that's about 1/10 of the US population. So think about, like, even if you're to go to one of the biggest cancer centers in the US to try to get data to do stuff, it's only natural that you wouldn't get enough Black people. You wouldn't just get, because the demography, the hospital records would represent, or would sort of mirror the population demographics. And so one way to start democratizing this data and democratizing research is to build capacity back where you can get the source, and that source is in Africa. So example is this study to see what is the median age of colorectal cancer in an African population, not in the white population or in an Asian population, in an African population. It just shows you that, as an African, if you're bearing those genetics, you're going to be at a greater risk because the guidelines does not work for you. And so are there ways with hard evidence that we can start having these conversations and changing these things? Those are the things we need to find out. Very good example too is a vaccine that all of us know, which is the HPV vaccine that was first developed by Merck, the Gardasil one. So Gardasil covered for certain strains of HPV, and that was because they had seen, they had epidemiologic data on what's the strains of HPV that causes cancer, that causes cervical cancer in the United States. And so obviously the vaccine company would work to see how it can protect for those strains. So when they say the vaccine is like 95%, I can't remember the number now, but 95% efficacious, I'm just giving, I might be wrong, but I knew it's in the 90s, right? Either 92 or 95% efficacy. Would you really say that that's the same efficacy in Africa when you don't know what the prevalence or the type of HPV that is actually causing cervical cancer? You need to know that epidemiology. You need to understand the epidemiological picture to actually say for sure that this is what the efficacy is. The efficacy could be less than 90%, it's still high, but it could be less than 90% just based on the way that the virus is distributed among, the African population. So those are the things I think that, regulatory agencies in Africa need to be looking at. If they can't sponsor an actual trial, they should have epidemiologic data so that they can mirror some of these things that are getting approved in their countries to know exactly what the efficacy is in their populations. The other thing I would like to say is this: in every clinical trial, the most important thing is not efficacy. And for those who are wondering what efficacy is, it's the degree of effectiveness. That's what efficacy is, the degree of effectiveness of a drug, of a vaccine, or whatever. And so the most important thing is safety. So it is better to have a safe drug that is not even efficacious or minimally efficacious than to have a highly efficacious drug and a very toxic drug. And so one of the things that the FDA does, one of the primary things they would always do is to look out for safety. Safety first is not the effectiveness. Safety has to come first. And so with all the things that have happened from Tuskegee to Henrietta Lacks to, safety is really important. And I am very proud of, some institutional review boards in Africa that take this thing seriously, rightly or wrongly. A lot of times when you're planning studies here in the US and you just feel that, oh, once a US institution has approved it, then you take it to Africa, then they should approve it because America or Europe approved it. There are some African IRBs that are really doing their work, and I'll really give a shout out to Kenya. Kenya has actually rejected studies that were approved, in the IRB of leading institutions here in the US. And it's not that the leading institution here in the US wanted to do harm. It's just that there are some things in these ethical review boards that also have a cultural context that people in those countries will understand better and will try to fix, in the proposal. And, they have to make adjustments to get it approved. So, I don't know who and who is going to be listening to this, but always have your own IRB, look at things, even if it's coming from a country you think that should have all the experts to have, given it a green check mark. It's always good to look at it because there are some things you might notice, not necessarily, done on purpose. It's just based on just not understanding the cultural context and, the context to that the population you're going to be doing that human subjects research. So yeah, so these are the things I think are very important to, just to set the stage for discussions and to ensure that people increase their. I have participated in the clinical trial, and it was not. It's not a. It was a trial that was trying to look at the distribution of, I'll just say research that was trying to look at the distribution of rods and cones in the eyes. The rods and cones are what perceives color and, at the back of the retina. And, when they saw the amount of cones I had, they said I was like a whole outlier, I had it was such a huge deviation from what the population was. And who knows, maybe the population were just white, because, Washington State is 83% white. Found something that it's more, because, maybe there were not a lot of Black participants in it. So maybe just found something that, maybe Black people have better, more cones behind, their retina. So, so those are the things that you can, so diversity is so important. I'm not just preaching it. I want to participate anywhere I can, to know, something that we don't know. It's always very good. And there's so much work that needs to be done for education, community engagement, because the mistrust is based on facts. And so we cannot undo that. But what we can do is to engage and educate and say, hey, we have a lot of gaps, we have a lot of things, checkpoints that are being addressed, and they're being addressed every single day. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kingsley, Dr. Linda, and Dr. Cynthia. I really, really appreciate the time you took to really give us this information. And I applaud you for your work. I applaud you for what you're doing and what you continue to do. And thank you so much for partnering with us to inform and educate the people who are tuned into this talk. So right now, please go ahead, put in your questions in the Q&A and let us know what you're thinking. Let us know what are some of the things that you've learned from this that you want us to address or sort of shed more light on. So while we're doing that, I'm just going to ask our digital strategist, Nana, if we can see the data from the little survey that we did. So here we go. So a lot of us know what it is, just a few of us don't know. However, even though we all know what a clinical trial is, only 1 in about 6 of us have participated in a clinical trial. And also, we do kind of know, it's sort of like yes and no. We do know people who have participated. And prior to the webinar, we all believe that they are useful and necessary. And we continue to believe that they're useful and necessary. So we've
One person thought they were not trustworthy and has moved to useful but necessary.
But necessary. And for that, I think we have achieved, we've achieved something. So if we can keep pushing one by one in the community to get us to participate and to also talk to our doctors about this, because the truth of the matter, this much I know, I attended a conference at the Farber Cancer Center about participation among, our populations and minorities on clinical trials. And the speaker, she's a director from the Sloan Kettering Cancer Institute in New York. And she did say that, unfortunately, amongst us, even here in the US, our doctors don't tell us about it. So for those of you who are providers on this forum who are listening in, I think it's important to engage with your patients, to let them know what's going on and open them to the opportunity. And not only that, of course, so I just saw one of our attendees. She said one thing that breeds mistrust is often missing in the process of clinical trials is that the final results are not communicated to the communities participated. So I'm going to read that again. One thing that breeds mistrust is that the final results are not communicated to those who participate. So just briefly, from Dr. Cynthia to Dr. Kingsley, how is this being addressed, especially in Africa? So whatever side view that you have, how is it addressed here? Is it communicated here? And even on the continent, is it communicated? So Dr. Cynthia, over to you. And if you can unmute.
Okay, thank you. I think Dr. Kingsley will answer better because of his involvement, on the, with Africa, with the work in Africa. But I would say that's not quite true. You just have to be curious. For instance, the website I mentioned, www.clinicaltrials.gov, you can get a lot of information, not only about the ongoing clinical trials, but when the trials have been done, the data, but I do agree with you. We have to do better. That's the medical community in communicating this result. What I mean is bringing it down to the level where, the layperson, the patient can understand. And that's part of what the clinicians and the MDs on the field should do. Like when you go and you consult, well, they should be able to present that information. Apart from the textbook information, what they work with, they should be able to present that. Like if you're considering in enrolling in a clinical trial, they do have this information. They're available. They can provide them. You can also, out of your own, curiosity, you can, this is the world of technology, IT. The information are out there, is what I mean. As for Africa, I really don't know, how, you can get information. It's communicated in Africa, but Dr. Kingsley probably can answer that.
Yeah, so let me say this. Clinical trials in Africa is still very novel and is still evolving. As you know, safety is very important, and there have to be a lot of, clinical trials requires so much infrastructure, right? Like even here in the US, there are some sites that you think they are great, and when they do the pre-inspection, they don't pass. They have to do this, they have to do that before, because the pharma companies are also opening themselves to lawsuits if something happens, and so they need to ensure that the sites have the necessary staff from how they manage data, how they manage finances, how they manage how they report side effects, all these things you have to be on top of. So they're the kind of clinical studies that are happening in Africa is more of what they call feasibility studies. South Africa does quite, just like we have clinical trials set up here, they do clinical trials, but it's something that it's, a lot of African institutions are now thinking around, and they're doing studies that would keep building their capacity to manage actual clinical trials. And then, pharma companies and other, institutions can have that confidence, say, okay, well, we're going to sponsor a clinical trial here, especially when it comes to cancer. There are other clinical trials that do take place. Those ones don't need the kind of infrastructure that cancer clinical trials. And, cancer clinical trials is a big thing. You need to have the staff to manage the SAEs that come. You need to have a good reporting system. And that there are lots of challenges. When we're talking about reporting system, we're talking about having a computer, having your data in the cloud, being secured, because confidentiality is also very important. So there are just so many levels of check marks that African institutions need to get to. Some of them are there, but obviously there's still a long way to go. But it's something that even institutions here have to already thinking about how to, if they're applying for, let's say, an NIH grant, because there's the NCI, the National Cancer Institute, do have the Center for Global Health, and they have quite a good budget for focusing on low and middle income countries. And so people that are now writing grants for clinical trials to be done, in collaboration with US institutions, in those grants, there has to be a training component. If let's say, the site needs to be doing immunohistochemistry, in that grant, they would have the budget for that. So these trials also help to improve, capacity, not just at a clinical skill and research level, but also capacity for the health system itself. So it's still some ways away. And then you mentioned a very important thing, like the people, a lot of doctors are 3 times likely not going to tell, Black patients about clinical trials. And it's 2 ways. One is just unconscious bias or unconscious prejudice. The second is
public health crisis.
Yeah, exactly. And the second too is the fact that if a doctor have noticed that over time, and this is just the way humans work, right? Over time, if you tell a Black person about a trial and they opt not to do it, they just kind of assume that this next person wouldn't. So I wouldn't spend that clinic time telling them. So it comes in 2 ways. In some ways, they're just not thinking about it because they have this prejudice, either conscious or unconscious, that would just make them not to give the same type of care that they would give, someone from another race. Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to also.
Sorry, before you do, I see that Dr. Linda, I would like to hear your perspective, and then we'll go back to Dr. Cynthia.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I just want to say thank you to the person that raised that question. That was a very great question. So I just want to point out something. In clinical trials, as it goes along, we have routine interim analysis. We have safety analysis where the drug is being reviewed by either data review boards to see how the drug is going, the efficacy, the toxicity, and everything. So, and it's the goal is that the physician is supposed to communicate that information, the results of the safety analysis to the patient, especially to when we have protocol amendments, and there's any protocol amendment that needs the subject to be reconsented. And so when the patient is brought back to the office to be reconsented, and the physician it's the due responsibility to tell the patient, you're being reconsented because there was a change in this, and this is the result from our safety analysis, this is the result from our data. They owe that information to the patient because they need to know so that the patient is aware if the drug is there's no efficacy or something like that. And then the other thing I just wanted to say is that just like Dr. Kingsley said, we can bring a lasting, there are ways we can bring a change to this. And being for doctors, for the physicians, principal investigators, they need to discuss it with their patient, especially if you see a patient coming into the office, especially someone of African descent, ask them, what is your belief? See, when I come into the office, you ask me, what do you believe? What do you think about vaccine? What do you think about clinical trials? Let them know what they're feeling, and then it will give a broader shift, because like you said, most of the physicians here, they don't really have an idea of what is going on in this thing. And then the FDA too has to drive it with tools. They have to come out with campaigns. They have to come up with guidance documents for each physician side, for each side. Let them have a guardian document in place that this is the tool to include that. If before you open up for a clinical trial, let's see what's your data in inclusion and diversity. How many patients have you run? How many clinical trials have you run where it's inclusive? Community engagement, just like you're doing like this, it's great awareness. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Linda. Over to you, Dr. Cynthia.
So I just wanted to say something, what I have observed, and because it's really our right. I've noticed something about the Black patients. We're not curious. We don't ask questions. I mean, we do have exception. I don't know why, if it's intimidation. I always tell people, like, really, there's no excuse. Yeah, public health is talking a lot about unconscious bias from MDs and clinicians. Yes, it's there. But you should know your right, and you should exert your right. You should be curious. I notice, just from observing patients and data, that it appears our white counterparts are more curious. They don't take anything for light. They ask questions. So you should ask. I mean, if you ask, you'll get answers. If you're sick, you will find, like the Bible says. So my throwback to that is that if you don't know, it's because, I mean, it's not all your fault. The information is there. It's because you didn't ask. Ask. Don't be intimidated. Don't be shy.
Dr. Cynthia, I'm glad that you're saying that. But, as you were talking about that, I just thought about, culture. And that's one of the reasons why we founded TamBo Foundation, to sort of chip around all these ethno-religious conceptions that we have about many things. You're saying we should ask questions, but I remember growing up, and my parents are actually listening to this, but I'm grateful for them that they allowed us to ask. But when you begin to ask beyond, it's like, hey, you talk too much. Hey. Stop talking. And so a lot of us, I mean, I'm glad that most of us here are Africans, we grew up and we're not really, it's like, daddy, why? Hey, you talk too much. So you carry that with you, because it's sort of, your body keeps score of those situations. So even when you're faced with situations, you don't know where to go, you don't know what to ask, you don't know who to ask. I was having a conversation with an entrepreneur this morning, and she was telling me, she comes in contact with a lot of people who don't know what to do because they don't know where to go in our community. They don't know who to ask. They don't know who to talk to. And so we need to do a lot of, we need a paradigm shift in that area, that it's okay to ask questions. That is one thing that we really need to chip at culturally. And I see some questions and I see some response. Somebody saying, yes, I agree, we don't ask questions. And also, somebody said, my major issue with clinical trials in Nigeria is the fact that doctors use fear to get people to participate. With breast cancer, you are told there will be a recurrence if you don't participate, and which is an observation. So do the companies or collaborators insist on a report after such trials? Please, who would love to answer that question? This question is actually coming from an advocate that I know very well.
I mean, you should just present the facts to the patients, and you should not induce even if you're going to say reimburse for transportation or lunch or whatever, it shouldn't be seen as like you're inducing that patient. The patient should be told the facts, and they should make their own decision if they want to participate. And it's their right to say no or yes. We're trying to encourage people to participate in clinical trials, but they should understand for themselves. They can get someone that, if they have questions, they should ask the doctor. But it's they shouldn't be induced. They shouldn't be scared into saying, if you don't do this, you're going to because it's an experimental drug. We don't know, right? So you cannot say you're going to, it's part of trying to know. And so it's wrong for any patient to be induced or be coerced or to be poached as like this is to use the fear component to make them, because again clinicians and researchers are also looking for the numbers, because they are looking for certain numbers to give them the statistical power they are looking for to actually make conclusions. So people are also looking for participants. So in the quest for looking for participants for that trial, you don't want to infringe on those things that I mentioned. And, just for the audience, you mentioned ethno-religious, okay? And for people who are saying that, oh, I'm a person of faith, I shouldn't participate, it's gonna, I would say that clinical trials is ancient wisdom, right? And for those that believe in the Bible, this is not a religious talk, but for those that, believe in the Bible, there's a famous Bible story that actually documented a clinical trial, what is referred to as a non-randomized controlled trial. And that was in the time of Daniel, right? I'm now sounding like a pseudo, pastor here, but I know Bible stories, and I'll just read this Bible story. So, Daniel and his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they did not want to, in quotes, defile themselves with the king's food, right? They felt that it was maybe unhealthy. It was not the kind of food they want to eat. And, one of the guards went to report the king and said, hey, these guys are not eating the food. And, that is like they're disobeying your orders. And Daniel had a very interesting way to sort of prove that, so now this is now a research question. Is it good for me to eat this food, or is it bad, or is there a better alternative, right? So he said, we're going to eat just vegetables, and we're going to eat all these other foods, and follow us in the next 10 days. So they randomized, themselves, there were people that were eating the king's food, and then there were people that were eating, Daniel and his people were eating their food. And the end result, or the end points to that trial, was how healthy did they look, right? I don't know what metrics they used, but the record was
sure looked healthy.
And his friends looked much better, much healthier than the people that ate the king's food. And the king was like, yeah, oh yeah, let's let them continue with that food, because they have proven through clinical trials, a randomized controlled trial, that—
I love that.
You're giving me a weapon.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
Like, seriously, this is a good one. So, Dr. Cynthia, I'm going to have you quickly, and then because we have one of the attendees who has their hands raised and would like for them to ask their questions. So go ahead, Dr.
Okay,
Cynthia.
so it was about the doctors coercing people using fear. But you know us, we African, it's like, that's the way you get attention. Even the preachers, the church, they do it. But it's unethical. It's unethical. And you should know that. You shouldn't allow anyone. I mean, that's the whole purpose of the informed consent. You're giving your patient information, and you're volunteering that information. And in fact, the guidelines around informed consent is that you don't just bring in a patient, a person, and you say, okay, this is a trial. Okay, this is good. It's good for you. You need it. Okay, sign. We discourage that totally. You should give the patient room. Give them the informed consent, which often documents the study in lay language. In fact, there's even a guideline for that don't use too much scientific terms. They want it to be as lay as possible. So what's the grade they use, Linda? I think it's grade what language, so that people understand. So that's totally wrong, unethical. You go away with your informed consent, which has all the information, and they are even also supposed to document alternatives to say, look, if you don't want to participate in this clinical trial, here are the alternatives, alternative treatment you can go for. So that's totally wrong. It's unacceptable anywhere, whether in Nigeria or, I mean, whether in Africa or here. And then now this is me, because I'm so much enjoying Dr. Kingsley, and I just wanted to ask this. So my time in Nigeria, all the way from medical school, and then in National Institution of Pharmaceutical Research and Development, this was my experience. Sometimes it overwhelmed me, made me very depressed. Is that there's no collaboration between these two worlds. We're talking about the West and Africans, and there's a reason. There's the tangible, reasonable. There are reasons for it. We're known to doctor information. We're known to do all sorts of things. That is there, but also we do some great things. We have, like in NIPRID, where I worked, we had done some research initiated by the institution, Federal Health Ministry. It was on sickle cell. I mean, where else do you want to conduct such research and get real data? Wouldn't it be in Africa, in Nigeria? That's where you have a lot of patients with sickle cell. So we did it. We had the data, we had everything, but they were just not accepted by the West. It also happens even with University of Ibadan, with our reputation. I mean, with the reputation they have and things, they've worked in the past with the Western world and they've established some level of, but there's still that the West will look down on data that comes from the African continent or the African people as, in a way inferior or some, less than what they want. So what's your experience with that? And then there's also another experience I wanted to share is that this is not even with the people, with the patients now in Africa, but also with the scientists, with the researchers. I had the opportunity of, one time the NIH came to us. It was an investigator who came. It was on a grant and she wanted to work with us because she thought this is where she could get the information, HIV infected patient with tuberculosis and all those opportunistic infection, where else? So she came to us. But the obstacles, the barricade they put up, I was hearing my director, people saying, what's in it for us? You got to share the money, share the grant. We were unwilling. I couldn't believe it, down to the nurses that I was working with. Here I was championing it. I'm like, yes, this is a good research. We need to be involved. We have the patient population. We want to be part of this. And they were saying, what is in it for us? There's that attitude. How do we deal with this? Because these are all the cultural, barricades to what we're seeing. We're seeing the West world just leave us behind. And I'm really impressed to see that we've gone ahead, you're working back in Africa, Antonio, you're doing all this, in between to just help deal with these cultural differences.
Yeah, so, there's that, obviously, the what is in it for us is there. But I think one thing we also need to look at is when a US institution, for example, get a grant to do certain research that is in collaboration with an African institution, ideally, they're supposed to, in that grant, they're supposed to impute compensation for collaborators, right? Because they're going to be using their time and their expertise in doing it, right? So they might have asked it in a way that I don't care about the research, I care about the money, right? But there's no US investigator that is going to be doing any research without being compensated for that time, right? Because they are putting in their skills, their expertise. And if you look at research in terms of equity between the global North and South, that is really being looked at right now. It's a very important discussion. And the reason why this discussion is so important is because just last year or a year, I think, well, last year looks like it's 2019, but I'm referring to 2019, right? Because 2020 was sort of like almost blank. But one of the major things that happened in the scientific community was the Ebola crisis in the DRC. And so there is this man, his name is Dr. Mutembe, who is a Congolese doctor. In 1973, he had just finished his PhD in virology at one of the best institutions in Belgium. He's a physician, but went to do a PhD in virology, came back to the DRC. There were no labs for him to implement what he had learned in Belgium. So he became a field epidemiologist. And that's when he started noticing a certain type of hemorrhagic fever that was just different from the normal hemorrhagic fevers that were sort of prevalent at the time. And so he knew that this was different. He flew one of the nuns that had that hemorrhagic phenomenon to Kinshasa, which is the capital of the DRC. Then the DRC was called Zaire, you know, before it became the DRC. And so he took this blood sample. He knew it was very infectious. He sent it to his colleagues in Belgium, in the research institute in Belgium, to like figure it out. They had all the you know, the infrastructure to do that. They described that virus, but the you know, the WHO and CDC, like, this is very infectious. You don't have a level 4 lab, send it to the CDC. So they sent it to the CDC, and then Fleming and colleagues described the virus and named it Ebola. And so they wanted to publish the results in the New England Journal of Medicine. And then the researcher, who was a colleague of Dr. Mutembe that had sent the sample to the United States, said, no, I have to be the first author of that, because I sent you guys and the man's name is, and not to cast him under the bus, I think he's a great leader, he's a great global health leader, Peter Piott. He's currently the director of the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And he was formerly the director of UNAIDS. So Peter Piott was like, no, I have to be the first author, right? So they published this paper. He was the first author, and now he's credited as the co-discoverer of Ebola. Now, if you type, you know, if you type that, you see he's a co-discoverer of Ebola. But this man in DRC that sent the sample, forgotten in the books of history, never known. So how did he now come to light? 40 years later, there was another outbreak of Ebola in the DRC. And so he decided to use the serum of people that had recovered from the disease, and he designed a trial to use that as a therapy for people who had the disease, and it worked. And all of a sudden, the whole international, he just gained international spotlight. And that was when people knew that he was actually the person that sent that first sample that is now known as what is called Ebola. So since that happened, you know, he gave this famous NPR interview. A lot of US institutions, one of the major topical discussions is equity in North-South collaboration. If you're going to Africa to do research, you have to look at them as your partners. You're there to learn from you, as well as they're there to learn from them, you know. Even if you're bringing the funding, yeah, it's important, you know, the funding is here, you know, research funding is here, but that shouldn't tip the balance as much. If you're going to be getting paid for your time, then I think an African researcher deserves, because they went to medical school as well, they, you know, they are trained, they might not have the same expertise as you do, but it's a collaboration, because you're going to learn, you know, from them. You're going to learn, you're going to see certain things that you've never even seen in the US. That's part of learning. So it's a win. It should be a win-win situation. That said, the corruption and the, you know, the lack of transparency in managing finances, I'm not exculpating it from this. It should be looked at. I think it should be addressed on the continent. There should be better ways for financial management, financial administration. But at the same time, there should be equity in this sort of partnerships.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So one of our attendees has her hands raised. We're just going to give her the opportunity to ask her questions. So Nana, go ahead and allow her to talk.
If you could unmute, I've permitted you to talk now. If you can unmute,
please. You've been given, yes. Okay. The person coming in as Oluwatoyin Adeomi, can you unmute? So while she's unmuting, I'm just going to read some of the conversations that came in. There's one here. I agree on diversity in clinical trials because I saw and experienced firsthand during my cancer treatment. I experienced the craziest of symptoms that my oncologist said in her 30 years of practice, she never saw what I experienced. While going through so much pain, she told me to come in so they can see, because they couldn't believe what I was experiencing. The purpose of me coming in was so they can document it and send it for a research, I was told. So this is from one of our participants. Oluwatoyin Adewumi, can you go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question? Okay, looks like she's falling off, unfortunately. Well, so we have 11 more minutes. I'm wondering if we have any more questions. I see there's another question here that came in. So who covers the cost of clinical trials? Patient, pharma company, or insurance? Panelists?
Yeah, actually, the drug company, it's the one that they're the sponsors of the clinical trial, so they cover the cost.
Okay.
And I just wanted to say something. Can you?
Insurance to a degree.
Okay.
And that's something we should also look at and talk about, because I do see minority being left out simply because of that. They don't have insurance. The pharmaceutical company or the sponsor will only cover to a certain degree. You still need insurances for some of this clinical trial.
Over to you, Dr. Linda.
Yeah, I just wanted to chip in something, Dr. Kingsley. I like what you're doing in clinical research over there in Africa. And that's one of the things I have a passion for. For the 12 years I've worked in oncology, my desire is to go back and give my experience in clinical trials. Because now I'm hearing this thing, just like what you're saying, I'm really impressed. I mean, they've come a long way, and I know there's much to be done. And so I really applaud you for what you're doing, and I like to see more. So I'll be talking to you more and to see how I mean, clinical
Absolutely.
research.
Yeah.
Yes, I want to see more things go on. So people like us that are doing clinical research here, I mean, clinical research here has gone a long way. So if I could go back to Africa and give back, as I've told them, I'm ready to go back and give, just to teach them how to run clinical trials.
Yeah.
I don't need to be paid. I don't need it, but just that I'm giving back to the society what I've gained. And this is what I'm looking for. So when I see people like Tony, a cancer survivor, there's so many people out there that needs help. So if this is what this can do for me to go, and I mean, I'm really emotional right now, but I think I'd like to partner with you and see what you're doing in
How about starting CRO in Nigeria?
So you know what? My dear participants, it doesn't end there. And I'm just going to say, you know, to all our participants and attendees, one of our long-term goals at the foundation, especially in the capacity building space, is to have a learning management system that clinicians, researchers, nurse practitioners, nurses on the continent can go to get information. So this conversation with our panelists is not ending here. I'm writing it down. That LMS, there's going to be a section on clinical trials, and we'll be sending, you know, educational media technologists to sit with Dr. Linda, Dr. Kingsley, just so that they can give their knowledge, and we can host it in the cloud just so they can see it. So it's from us to us. We have to use what we have, look for winnable solutions. So I hope that you will join us. We do have a donate button on our Facebook webpage, and we also have a donate button on our website. So if you want us to continue to help you herald and make sure that health equity gaps are closed, I say unashamedly that we're here. That was why this foundation was founded. So yes, Dr. Linda, it's not ending here. Whatever we can do now, we can do now. What can we do now? So whatever solutions we have, we will definitely work together. So I just wanted to put that out there.
I'm open. Yeah, you know, I want to connect to everyone definitely beyond this, and just to touch on the cost too. So you know, and that's where, and I just actually thought of this right now. I think that's where Blacks too are sort of excluded in clinical trials, because it's important. You know, the insurance components come to play, because the insurance will cover things that are considered standard of care. Then the drug company will cover any extras. So if, let's say, standard of care, you would have like 2 CT scans in 6 months or whatever, and you're doing an extra CT scan as a result of that trial, then the insurance company would cover the cost of that extra CT scan. So you see why a drug company would not want someone that do not have insurance to get into a clinical trial because they can only cover the ones that is, in quote, experimental and not the standard of care. And who does that who does that like take out from a lot of the clinical trials?
Minorities and people of low social economic status. Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. We are coming to the end of this series. I'm very grateful to all of you for joining in. Thank you. We will have more to come and we will let you know. And also want to let you know that this is actually being recorded live on Facebook. So it's live on Facebook, and I know that some people are joining us live on Facebook, and the recording will be available on the Foundation's YouTube channel, so you can share it to your members. So there's another chat that came in right now. It says, this has been an absolute educative and informative session. Dr. Cynthia convinced me that clinical trials are essential and a great thing to participate. We're still majorly far behind in terms of awareness, inclusion, and trust. As we can see, even with the COVID vaccine, it's been a major toll to have the Black community take the vaccine. They particularly had a major plea segment on CNN with various doctors and experts appealing to the Black community because they know the Black community held back due to mistrust, like Dr. Kingsley emphasized, because of prior bad experiences. So this is a major work in progress to convince the Black community about medical clinical trials, because there is this belief that Blacks are used as guinea pigs. With sessions like this, I agree with Dr. Linda that seminars in churches to educate members about wellness will be helpful, and some are turning the curve and doing this already. So thank you once again, everyone. I'm very grateful that you all took time out of your busy schedule to join us. Thank you, Daddy. This is fantastic, and I'm extremely proud of you, my number one. Thank you. You know, all I can say is this: let's not have the conversation stop here. I want to appreciate my International School of Ibadan class of 98 members who joined in. I see you, I appreciate you. I see some of my highly esteemed, and I call them, the name just evaporated from my brain, but you know, I call them legacy clients who are joined, who've been with me in this journey. And I also want to appreciate one of our former board of directors, Dr. Bina Ajiman. She's here with us. Our other board of directors are also joining in from Facebook Live. Thank you, thank you, thank you, everyone. Thank you. I cannot thank you all enough. And please, let's keep it going. Let's keep advocating in our different spheres. For those of you who are policy members, who are in the policy space, Mr. Oshibogun, I appreciate you. Thank you for joining in. Please, let's keep the conversation going at the local level, at the state level, at the federal level, wherever we are. I'm actually a member of a work group at my place of work, an organ donation. And we were talking about, again, diversity and inclusion. Immigrants in the US, when you tell them organ donation, they're quick to say, oh my God, what is this? So the education aspect, there's so much to do. There's work to be done. If we don't chip away at the cultural differences, we will not come to a place of health equity. And I think that is what it is. I mean, like we mentioned earlier, coming from a background where you don't ask questions, you don't speak truth to power, you don't talk about certain things. So when we come here, we don't talk to our doctors. You know, we don't know what to ask. We don't know what to say. I was when I had the awareness session with the Yoruba community of Massachusetts, one of the doctors, he's a medical doctor himself, and he said he went to his PCP, who also happens to be a urologist, and he said, you know, I have 9 African men come to my practice, and you're the only one that has agreed to do a prostate check. 9 African men come in, but only one come to do a prostate check. So these are things that we need to continue to work on, and I hope that you would join us to continue to spread this awareness, chip away at this ethno-religious stereotypes and beliefs that most of us of African descent hold dear. Thank you once again for joining us. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day. Dr. Cynthia Echo, Dr. Linda Agu, Dr. Kingsley Indo, I cannot thank you enough, and I will continue my thank you after this is done. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.